What if betrayal does not begin with cheating? That question alone has ended years of confusion for many men, because the truth is far more uncomfortable than most people realize. By the time physical cheating happens, something else has often been happening for weeks, months, or even years beneath the surface. Quietly, invisibly, hidden behind ordinary conversations, casual explanations, and words that seem completely harmless. That is why so many men never see it coming. Not because they are foolish, not because they are blind, but because they are looking for the wrong signs. Most people expect betrayal to arrive like a storm, sudden, obvious, impossible to miss. But real betrayal rarely works that way. It usually begins as a slow shift. A change in energy, a change in attention, a change in emotional investment, and perhaps most importantly, a change in language. The words start changing before the actions do. The explanations become different. The tone becomes different. The meaning behind certain phrases begins to evolve. And unless you know exactly what to listen for, those changes can pass right by unnoticed. Many men spend months trying to understand where everything went wrong. They replay conversations in their heads. They revisit old memories. They search for the exact moment the relationship changed, and often they arrive at the same painful realization. The warning signs were there. The clues existed. The words were spoken, but they did not understand what those words really meant at the time. That is why this conversation matters. Because awareness is not about becoming paranoid. It is not about assuming the worst. And it is certainly not about turning relationships into investigations. It is about understanding human behavior. It is about recognizing patterns. It is about seeing reality clearly before reality forces itself upon you. During this video, you will learn 4 common lies that are often spoken before a relationship crosses dangerous territory. Some of these phrases sound caring, some sound reasonable, some sound completely innocent. Yet beneath the surface, they can reveal emotional shifts that many men overlook. You will learn why these statements appear, what they often mean, and why the real message is usually hidden between the words rather than inside them. But before I tell you that, stay with me, because what comes next will completely change how you see this. There is something most people never talk about. People rarely announce their intentions directly. Very few individuals wake up one morning and openly declare that they are preparing to betray someone they once claimed to love. Human beings are far more complicated than that. Before actions change, emotions change. Before emotions change, thoughts change. And before thoughts fully reveal themselves, language changes. That is where the clues live, not in dramatic confessions, not in shocking discoveries, but in subtle patterns that repeat themselves over time. The problem is that emotions often blind people to those patterns. Love wants to believe, hope wants to trust, attachment wants to explain away concerns, and because of that, many people dismiss the very signals that later make perfect sense. Most people will never hear this, not because it is hidden, but because they stop too soon. They look for certainty, where only patterns exist. They wait for proof while the truth quietly unfolds right in front of them. And that brings us to something even deeper. This video is not really about women. It is not even really about cheating. It is about understanding behavior. It is about recognizing emotional distance before it becomes emotional absence. It is about seeing the road before reaching the cliff. Because one of the most painful experiences in life is realizing that your instincts were trying to warn you long before your mind was willing to listen. Some of the phrases you are about to hear may sound familiar. Some may make you uncomfortable. Others may remind you of conversations you once brushed aside without a second thought. Pay attention to all of them, especially the final lie, because the last one is often the most dangerous of all. Not because it sounds suspicious, but because it sounds completely harmless. In fact, many people hear it repeatedly and never question it. Yet hidden inside that simple statement is one of the strongest indicators that something deeper may be happening beneath the surface. By the end of this video, you will understand why certain words matter, why emotional shifts often come before physical actions, why so many men miss the warning signs, and how to recognize patterns without becoming fearful, bitter, or cynical. If you enjoy exploring female psychology, human behavior, relationships, self-mastery, and the deeper truths that most people overlook, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now let us begin with the first lie that causes countless men to doubt their own instincts long before they discover the truth. Why do people hide their true intentions, even from the people they claim to love? The answer is far more unsettling than most people realize. Because most people do not wake up one morning and decide to become the villain in someone else's story. Human beings are remarkably skilled at protecting their own self-image. Even when someone begins moving toward a decision they know could hurt another person, they often create explanations that make their behavior feel justified. This process is called self-justification. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. Before a person crosses a line, they usually create a story that makes crossing that line feel acceptable. Maybe they tell themselves they are unhappy. Maybe they tell themselves they are misunderstood. Maybe they convince themselves they deserve something they are not getting. The story comes first. The action comes later. That is why betrayal is rarely a sudden event. It is usually a gradual process of emotional preparation. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. They focus entirely on actions while ignoring the emotional shifts that happen long before those actions appear. One lesser-known fact from relationship psychology is that people often reduce feelings of guilt by mentally distancing themselves from their partner before making a major relationship decision. In other words, emotional separation frequently begins before physical separation. That changes everything. Because when emotional distancing begins, language begins changing too. Words become clues. Small phrases begin carrying hidden meanings. The person may not even realize they are revealing what is happening internally. But the signs are there. The explanations become different, the energy becomes different, the emotional investment becomes different. And suddenly conversations that once felt warm start feeling strangely cold. You cannot always explain it. You cannot always prove it. But you can feel it. Many men know exactly what this feels like. Something seems off. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just a strange feeling that something has shifted. And then comes the first lie. A lie that causes countless men to stop trusting themselves. A lie that sounds reasonable on the surface. A lie that can slowly disconnect a man from his own instincts. You are just being insecure. At first, that statement may sound harmless. After all, insecurity exists. Jealousy exists. Overthinking exists. Sometimes concerns really are based on fear rather than facts. But the problem begins when every concern gets labeled as insecurity, because there is an enormous difference between calming someone's fears and dismissing their reality. Healthy reassurance sounds different. Healthy reassurance creates clarity. Healthy reassurance welcomes honest conversation. Manipulation creates confusion. Manipulation makes a person question their own perception. There is a reason this tactic can be so powerful. Human beings naturally want to avoid appearing controlling or paranoid. Most decent people do not want to be the jealous partner. Most decent people do not want to be unreasonable. And because of that, they often silence themselves when something feels wrong. They stop asking questions. They stop expressing concerns. They stop trusting what they are noticing. Over time, repeated dismissal creates something dangerous: self-doubt. The focus shifts away from the concerning behavior and onto the person noticing it. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about boundaries. It becomes about whether the observer is flawed. That shift matters, because once a person begins doubting themselves, they become easier to ignore. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. Not every concern is insecurity. And not every accusation of insecurity is reassurance. Sometimes it is deflection. Sometimes it is an attempt to avoid accountability. The key is not the words themselves. The key is the pattern surrounding them. Does the person calmly address concerns? Do they create transparency? Do their actions match their explanations? Or do they become defensive while offering very little clarity? The answer often reveals far more than the phrase itself. And there is another statement that frequently appears alongside this one. A statement that has started more arguments than almost any other phrase in modern relationships. He is just a friend. Now, this is where many people become confused, because friendship is not the problem. Friendship should never be the problem. Healthy relationships allow friendships. Healthy relationships encourage trust. The issue is not friendship. The issue is secrecy. The issue is emotional investment. The issue is boundaries. Many affairs do not begin in bedrooms. They begin in conversations. Late night conversations, private conversations, personal conversations, the kind of conversations that slowly create emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy is powerful, sometimes even more powerful than physical attraction, because emotional intimacy creates connection. It creates understanding. It creates comfort. And over time, comfort can become attachment. That is why this phrase becomes controversial. Not because every friendship is dangerous, but because emotional boundaries can gradually shift without anyone acknowledging it. One day it feels innocent. Months later, it feels very different. The subtle signs are often easy to miss. A person becomes unusually protective of certain conversations. They become emotionally energized by interactions with someone outside the relationship. They begin sharing personal thoughts with another person before sharing them with their partner. None of these signs automatically mean betrayal, but together they can reveal growing emotional attachment. And emotional attachment often arrives long before physical involvement. The uncomfortable reality is that many relationships do not break when someone leaves. They begin breaking when emotional energy starts being invested elsewhere, and what happens next creates one of the strongest feelings of confusion a person can experience. Because now the changes become harder to ignore. The enthusiasm starts fading. The emotional availability decreases. The connection feels different. Many men describe it the same way. They cannot point to a specific event. They cannot identify a single conversation, but they feel the distance growing. The texts feel colder. The affection feels weaker. The excitement feels forced. The emotional presence seems to be disappearing. This is the silent shift most people ignore. Not because they are blind, because they desperately want things to be okay. Intuition often notices changes before logic catches up. That strange feeling in your stomach is not always proof, but it is information. It is your mind recognizing patterns before your conscious thoughts can fully explain them. And during this phase, another phrase often appears, one that sounds mature, one that sounds reasonable, one that sounds impossible to argue with. I just need some space. Now, to be clear, healthy space exists. Every strong relationship requires individuality. People need time to think, time to heal, time to recharge. Healthy space creates reconnection. Strategic distancing creates separation. That is the difference. Healing space moves people back toward the relationship. Escape space moves people away from it. The words may sound identical. The results rarely are. Pay attention to behavior. Behavior tells the truth. A person genuinely seeking healthy space still values connection, still communicates, still demonstrates care. A person emotionally checking out often shows a different pattern. Less effort, less curiosity, less engagement, more emotional absence. The explanation remains the same. The actions become completely different. Focus on actions. Always focus on actions. Because actions reveal intentions more clearly than explanations ever will. And what happens next is even more surprising. People often start rewriting their own relationship history. A memory that once felt beautiful suddenly becomes evidence of unhappiness. Moments that once brought joy become examples of disappointment. Good experiences get filtered through a completely different emotional lens. This psychological shift helps reduce guilt. If someone convinces themselves the relationship was always flawed, their future choices become easier to justify. Blame shifting begins growing. Responsibility starts moving. The story changes, not necessarily because the facts changed, because the emotional need for justification increased. That is why people sometimes sound like they are describing a completely different relationship than the one they previously celebrated. And then comes the final lie, the most revealing one of all, the one that frustrates countless people, the one that sounds harmless. Nothing is wrong. Repeated once, it means very little. Repeated constantly while obvious changes are happening, it becomes something entirely different. Emotional concealment is powerful. People often hide difficult truths until they have already made internal decisions. Not because they enjoy deception, because confronting reality feels uncomfortable. Silence becomes easier. Avoidance becomes easier. Deflection becomes easier. Meanwhile, the other person feels trapped in confusion. They see the changes. They feel the distance. Yet every attempt to discuss it leads nowhere. Nothing is wrong. Everything is fine. You are overthinking. But actions keep telling a different story. And that is why so many men later say the same thing. The signs were there all along. The signs were there. The meaning simply became clear too late. And here is perhaps the most important lesson of all. This is not about blaming women. It never was. Human nature works this way. Men do it. Women do it. People rationalize. People justify. People avoid difficult truths. Betrayal is rarely a single moment. It is usually a process, a series of emotional shifts that eventually become visible actions. The goal is not paranoia. The goal is awareness. Awareness sees patterns without becoming obsessive. Awareness observes behavior without becoming controlling. Awareness understands that one isolated phrase means very little, but repeated patterns often mean everything. And when heartbreak finally arrives, something unexpected begins to happen. Because beneath the pain lies a lesson most people never fully understand. A lesson about attachment, a lesson about self-respect, a lesson about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself, trying to keep them. And what I am about to share next? Nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. As we reach the end of this conversation, there is something important to remember. This video was never really about catching someone. It was never about becoming suspicious of every word, and it was never about teaching you to live in fear. It was about awareness. It was about understanding the quiet emotional shifts that often happen long before painful truths come to light. Throughout this journey, we explored four common phrases, four statements that can sometimes appear when deeper changes are happening beneath the surface. You are just being insecure. He is just a friend. I just need some space. Nothing is wrong. On their own, these words do not prove anything. That is one of the most important lessons in this entire video. Words alone never tell the full story. Anyone can say the right thing. Anyone can create explanations. Anyone can make promises. But patterns reveal what words try to hide. Consistency reveals what emotions try to conceal. Actions reveal what explanations often cannot. And that understanding changes everything. Because many people spend years searching for certainty. They want one sign, one phrase, one piece of proof that tells them exactly what is happening. Life rarely works that way. Human behavior is more subtle. Relationships are more complicated. The truth usually appears through patterns rather than isolated moments. That is why awareness matters so much. Awareness allows you to observe without becoming paranoid. Awareness allows you to pay attention without becoming controlling. Awareness allows you to trust yourself without becoming cynical. And that distinction is incredibly important. Because after experiencing betrayal, many people move toward extremes. Some stop trusting completely. Others become obsessed with monitoring every detail. Others build walls so high that nobody can get close to them again. But those reactions create a different kind of prison. The goal is not fear. The goal is clarity. The goal is not suspicion. The goal is wisdom. The goal is not becoming emotionally closed. The goal is becoming emotionally aware. There is a difference, a huge difference. The strongest relationships are not built on constant investigation. They are built on honesty, transparency, respect, mutual effort. And when those things exist, trust grows naturally. When those things disappear, trust begins struggling to survive. Many men who experience heartbreak spend years asking the wrong question. They ask, "How did this happen to me?" But eventually a better question appears. What was this experience trying to teach me? That question changes everything, because pain always carries information. Not pleasant information, not easy information, but valuable information. Heartbreak has a strange way of revealing truths that comfort never could. It reveals where boundaries were missing. It reveals where intuition was ignored. It reveals where self-respect was sacrificed. It reveals where attachment became stronger than reality. And while those lessons are painful, they are also transformative. Some of the strongest people you will ever meet are not people who avoided heartbreak. They are people who learned from it, people who allowed pain to become wisdom, people who refused to let disappointment turn into bitterness, people who chose growth over resentment. That is real strength. And perhaps the deepest lesson hidden inside this entire conversation is this: love should never require you to abandon yourself. Love should never demand that you ignore your instincts. Love should never force you to constantly explain away behavior that makes no sense. Healthy love creates peace. Healthy love creates clarity. Healthy love allows honesty to exist. When confusion becomes constant, something deserves attention, not panic, attention. There is a reason your intuition exists. There is a reason certain situations feel uncomfortable. There is a reason patterns matter. Your intuition is not always right, but it should not always be ignored either. Listen to it. Question it. Examine it. But do not silence it simply because someone tells you to. One day you may look back and realize that the quiet voice inside you understood the situation long before your mind was ready to accept it. And that realization can be life-changing. Everything you just heard, you already knew. Deep inside, you just needed someone to remind you. You already knew that actions matter more than promises. You already knew that consistency matters more than explanations. You already knew that genuine connection feels different from emotional distance. You already knew that truth leaves patterns behind. Sometimes we simply need permission to trust what we are seeing. And perhaps that is the greatest takeaway from this video. Trust patterns, trust consistency, trust behavior, trust your observations, not because they are perfect, but because reality usually reveals itself over time. The strongest man is not the one who controls others. The strongest man is the one who sees reality clearly and still chooses peace. Think about that for a moment. Seeing reality clearly requires courage. Accepting reality requires even more courage. And choosing peace after accepting reality is one of the strongest decisions a person can make, because peace is not weakness. Peace is strength under control. Peace is self-respect. Peace is emotional maturity. Peace is knowing that your value does not depend on another person's choices. And that understanding can change the direction of an entire life. Before you go, read this one last thing carefully. This might be the most important thing in this entire video. Never measure your worth by someone else's ability to recognize it. The right people will not force you to constantly question your value. The right people will not make honesty feel impossible. The right people will not require endless confusion to maintain connection. And until those people arrive, your responsibility is simple. Protect your peace. Protect your standards. Protect your self-respect. Those things are worth more than any relationship built on uncertainty. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these four lies do you think is the most common? Have you ever experienced one of these situations yourself? Was there a warning sign that only became obvious after everything was over? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story may help someone else who is going through the same struggle right now. And if you found value in this video, take a second to like it, not for the algorithm, but because it helps this message reach people who may need to hear it. And if you enjoy content about female psychology, relationships, self-mastery, emotional intelligence, and personal growth, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more conversations ahead. Conversations designed to help you see more clearly, think more deeply, and become stronger without becoming harder. Thank you for spending this time here. Take care of yourself. Trust your growth, trust your journey, and most importantly, trust the lessons life is trying to teach you.